Hello and welcome to Live Full, Retire Early, the podcast where we build calm wealth, intentional freedom and lives that don't need escaping from. We have real conversations with real people, just like you. So if this sounds like your thing, keep on listening. I'm Emma Woodhouse, your host. A few weeks ago, I ended up taking an unexpected mid-season break from the podcast. I'd like to say it was planned, but it really wasn't. But a part of me felt really uncomfortable about having to do this. Because when you're building something online, there's this constant internal pressure to keep producing, to keep posting, to keep showing up and to keep pushing yourself. But during that planned mid-season break, I realised something really important. The entire reason I created Live Full, Retire Early in the first place was never just about money. It was about building a life that actually feels good to live. And somewhere along the way, I caught myself slipping back into the exact mindset I was trying to help people move away from. You know, more output, more pressure, more pushing, without enough space to actually breathe. Which is what inspired this entire episode. Because I think there's a form of wealth people massively underestimate. Because your wealth comes from your health, your energy, your peace, your nervous system, your ability to think clearly, and your ability to enjoy your own life. And the truth is, that invisible wealth controls almost everything. So today, I want to talk about the wealth most people completely ignore until life forces their attention towards it. And it's something I think a lot of people quietly overlook. Over the past few years, I've spent a huge amount of time focusing on my financial life, which is completely normal. Because, as many of you know, since getting made redundant from a job I had for over 16 years, I went into survival mode. Not because I had no money or investments, but something in me kicked in and the switch just changed. And I think what really happened was grief. I was grieving for a version of my life that I thought was certain. A future I thought was guaranteed, and an identity I held so strong for 16 years. So yeah, something more primal kicked in. I became heavily focused on income, security, and building new skills. And on the surface, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but over time it became pressure, constant pressure. And eventually I realised my cup was overflowing. And that is when I shifted towards systems, structure, and long-term thinking instead. And for the most part, that's been a really positive thing. But recently, I realised something. While I've been building this one type of wealth, I've slightly, but not completely, but slightly, been neglecting another. And it took one really painful night for me to actually pay attention. I've always thought about wealth like scales. On one side, you've got money, your income, your savings, your investments, your financial security. But on the other side, you've got your health, your energy, your body, how you actually feel waking up every single day. And the thing is, most people spend their entire lives trying to stack just one side of the scales. More money, more success, and more progress. But if the other side starts slipping, eventually the imbalance catches up with you. And recently, mine did. For the past few months, my body has been trying to tell me something wasn't right. It was nothing dramatic at first, just little signs at first. They were the sort of things you notice, but you don't really stop to investigate properly. I didn't want to be overreacting or be overdramatic, thinking something was wrong. Complete transparency, it started as IBS, very bad IBS. Then the sleepless nights, waking up in the morning, and according to my Garmin watch, my body battery had barely recharged, and this was happening for 2 months. So what did I do as someone who was stressed, underrested, and had digestive problems? I did what everybody else would. I increased my caffeine intake to give me more energy. And I knew this wasn't going to fix the problem, but I figured this was just a bad moment that would just pass. And I think a lot of us would do this. Not because we don't care, but because we're busy and because life carries on. Because it's easy to convince yourself it's probably nothing. And that's exactly what I did. I just carried on. Until one night, I just couldn't anymore. It was painful. The kind of night where you just can't settle properly. You just can't get comfortable. And no matter how much you try and ignore it, you know something wasn't right. And I remember sitting in bed thinking, right, enough. I need to actually deal with this. And then the next day, I called the doctor. I had tests done, blood work, the usual process. And then the results came back. Most came back absolutely fine, but one in particular didn't. And honestly, that's when it really hit me. My cholesterol had increased by over 18% in just 12 months. I know for some people, you will hear that and think, well, loads of people have high cholesterol. And that's true, they do. But if something increases by 18% in just 1 year, what happens if nothing changes in the next year and the year after that? I'm not saying I would definitely have had a heart attack, and I'm not trying to catastrophize it. But what I am saying is, I didn't like the direction I was heading in, and I wasn't willing to just wait and see what happens. Let's just roll the dice. No, I wasn't going to do that. And this is when something really clicked for me. Because we spend so much time thinking about financial trajectory, growing income, compounding investments, building assets. But your health has a trajectory too. And whether you're paying attention to it or not, it's still moving. And that is what really stopped me in my tracks. Because I realised I'd become intentional with money, but no way near as intentional with my health. And what's interesting is, as soon as I took it seriously, as soon as I called the doctor, got the test results and started paying attention, my symptoms eased. And I mean eased almost immediately. And it genuinely made me stop and think, maybe my body wasn't breaking. Maybe it was just trying to get my attention. And the more I think about this, it really freaks me out. Because my body was clearly screaming at me to try and take action. And I was just ignoring it, like I had my head in the sand. I mean, I didn't have my head in the sand. I was fully aware what was happening. But it took something so bad, something so painful, for me to actually pay attention. And I wonder how many of us actually do this with our lives in all areas of our lives. We have to wait for it to get really bad for us to take action. So naturally, after all of this, the question comes, what changes now? And honestly, I don't think the answer is to make extreme changes. I think it's making small changes that will probably evolve over time. I don't think this is about completely reinventing my life overnight. Because I've done enough work on myself over the years to know that extreme reactions don't last. But what I do know, this isn't going to be about punishment, a crash reset, or a new me moment. It's more about recalibration, realignment. Because when I sat with all of this, seeing the results in black and white, I realised something. I've become incredibly intentional about money and business. And I think carefully about systems, structure, long-term outcomes, risk management and compounding. But I haven't been applying the same level of intentionality to my health. Well, not consistently anyway. But the irony is, health works in exactly the same way. Small decisions compound, daily habits compound, stress compounds, sleep or lack of sleep compounds, food choices, good or bad, compounds, movement compounds. And I think for a long time, I've been telling myself a story that was quietly disempowering me. It was a story that said, this is just life now. That I just needed to push through, make the best of it, keep going and keep performing. And when I hear myself say that and admitting that was my truth, it sounds quite sad. Because I think I'd fallen into this really common trap of, I'll be happy when. I'll slow down when things settle. I'll prioritise myself when work is less intense. I'll focus on my health when everything else is sorted. But the problem is, there's always something else. Another goal, another pressure, another reason to delay looking after yourself properly. So without fully realising it, I'd put my real health on the back burner because I felt there were more important things to focus on. And eventually, later arrives, and your body sends you the invoice, which is overdue. So what changes for me now? Like I said, this isn't perfection. It's mainly awareness. It's slowing down enough to actually listen to what my body is telling me. It's trying to improve my sleep properly instead of trying to override exhaustion with caffeine. It's managing stress better instead of normalizing it. It's moving more intentionally, eating more intentionally, and recovering more intentionally. But I do know this experience has shifted something in me. And I know there's no going back from this now. Because once you become aware of something, truly aware of it, it's very hard to unsee it. And after sitting with this for the past few weeks, I realised something else too. If I was going to make changes, they're not going to come from panic. Because panic creates extremes, and extremes very rarely last. And I know myself well enough now to know that the all or nothing approach doesn't work for me long term. So instead of creating some aggressive health overhaul, I've started creating a few calm ground rules for myself instead. Not rules built around punishment, but rules built around sustainability. Things like building slowly instead of dramatically, prioritising regulation over motivation, stopping the cycle of overriding exhaustion with caffeine, and not adding more to my plate than I can realistically recover from. And also learning to treat rest as part of the system instead of something I earn after burnout. Because I think one of the reasons so many people struggle to change their life sustainably is because they try and change everything at once. Their finances, their career, their routine, their body, their mindset, their business, their relationships. The thought of that makes me feel tired, just saying it. And eventually the whole system collapses under the weight of too many priorities. So for me, this next season of life and the podcast isn't about becoming extreme. It's about becoming intentional. And honestly, I'm not setting loads of rigid rules for myself either. Because at the same time of all this health stuff happening, I've also made the decision to change jobs. Because a huge part of that decision came from finally admitting to myself how much stress my previous environment was causing me. The work-life balance was awful. The pressure was consistent. And after this recent health scare, it's forced me to evaluate everything. Not just my health, but my career too. Because eventually you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of constantly overriding yourself? And I think for a long time, I'd normalised stress. I told myself it was just part of ambition, part of building something, part of trying to create a better future. But at some point, your body stops agreeing with the story your mind is telling itself. So instead of creating some intense overhaul, I'm focusing on a few calm foundations instead. Things like working out 4 to 5 times a week once I've properly settled into my new job. These are going to be things like strength and cardio. And to some people, I know 4 to 5 times a week sounds extreme, but it's not. Because as you know, my previous shift pattern was 4 on, 4 off. And on the off days, they were only my workout days. And I was working out very intensely for them 4 days, then having 4 days off from the gym. Which, for some people, that might work. But to me, it's an all or nothing thing. Like, I was chained to a desk for 11 hours a day for them 4 days off. And then I was throwing myself into something extreme again. And then coming out of it. It was too chaotic. And I'd rather have rest days in between the workout days. And this new routine will allow me that. I want to start meditating for 10 minutes in the morning before the noise of the day begins. I'm going to start reading daily, which is I've already started doing, and I'm currently reading the book Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson. It's about personality types, personality profiles. It's brilliant. I'm not going to set myself this crazy target of reading 10 pages a day. I've started reading just before I go to bed because it helps my brain switch off at night. Instead of having the telly on or scrolling on my phone, if I start reading before I go to sleep, it kind of starts switching my brain off. And my boyfriend's been seeing me do it, and he started doing it too. And he's been surprised on how he's benefited from it. I'm rebuilding simple routines around my home and environment too. Because when you've been stressed for long periods of time, even basic maintenance starts slipping without you fully noticing. And one of the biggest changes I'm going to make is having one full day each week of completely me time. No work, no business pressure, and no constant productivity. Just a space to switch off. Because right now, genuinely, I don't have that. And for years, I've convinced myself that was normal when you're ambitious. But I think there's a difference between building something meaningful and slowly burning yourself out into the ground while doing it. I don't know what the completely me time looks like right now. I don't know how I'm going to fill that space, but having that space is the thing. So as you can see, I'm not just reassessing my health. I'm reassessing everything. The pace of my life, the pressure I put on myself, the environments I put myself in, the way I work, the way I recover, and what success actually means to me now. Because I'm no longer willing to keep placing myself in stressful, toxic environments and then acting surprised when my body responds negatively to it. Because the trouble is, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And I can't. And that's both a blessing and a burden. Because once you become aware of something that's draining you, stressing you, keeping you stuck, or is quietly making you unwell, you don't really have a choice anymore. You either ignore it or betray yourself, or you change. And sometimes that change is uncomfortable. But what else is uncomfortable? It's staying in a place that you've outgrown. Because eventually your nervous system keeps the score. And I think sometimes we become so focused on building a successful life externally that we don't stop and ask whether it actually feels sustainable internally. So I'm not saying I have all the answers yet. I definitely don't. But what I do know is that this experience has shifted something in me. And I know there's no going back. But now, I'm reassessing everything, all areas of my life. It's made me realise that the goal can't just be achievement. It has to be longevity too. My energy, my peace, my health. Actually enjoying the life while I'm building it. Because there's no point creating freedom externally while feeling terrible internally. And I think that's the season I'm stepping into now. Not hustle, not survival mode, and not constantly pushing. But sustainability, longevity, energy, balance. Not perfect balance, but conscious balance. And I think this happens in more areas of life than we realise. We get signals, little nudges, things that don't quite feel right. But if they're not urgent enough, we just ignore them. Until eventually they become impossible to ignore. But by then, the cost is usually higher. And this ties into something I talk about on this podcast regularly. Because yes, I talk about financial freedom. I talk about building calm wealth. I talk about creating a work optional life. But what's the point in building a life you can't physically enjoy? Yeah, money gives you options, but your health is what allows you to actually use them. You can have the freedom, the flexibility, the income, the time. But if your body doesn't feel right, if your energy is low, if your health is quietly deteriorating in the background, it changes the quality of everything. And I think recently, my scales have tilted. Not completely, but enough. Because I'd been so focused on building one side of the scales, I wasn't properly checking in on the other. So this has been a bit of a reset for me. Not the extreme reset. Not in a completely reinvent your life overnight way. But in a pay attention, zoom out, slow down, look at the bigger picture kind of way. Because wealth isn't just what's sitting in your bank account. It's your energy and your health, your ability to wake up and feel good in your own body. It's made me zoom out and reassess all areas of my life. Not just my health, but everything. Because sometimes it does take a wake-up call like this to realise you've been operating with tunnel vision. You're so focused on making progress in one area that you stop checking in on the others. And after all of this, I actually went back to one of my coaching tools I often use with my clients. Because one of the things I love about coaching is that it helps you step outside of the day-to-day noise and look at the bigger picture honestly. Not from judgment, not from shame, just from awareness. And the tool I went back to is something traditionally called the Wheel of Life. Although, honestly, I think it's more of a life alignment check-in, but that's a bit of a mouthful, so we'll call it the Wheel of Life. Because what it does is highlight the areas of your life that might be thriving and the areas that might need a little bit more attention. Things like your health, relationships, finances, your career, personal growth, enjoyment, and purpose. These are the ones that I used. And what really struck me when I looked at my wheel was how easy it is to convince yourself you're doing well overall simply because one area of your life is performing strongly. You can be succeeding financially while struggling physically. You can be productive but exhausted. You can be progressing externally while quietly feeling disconnected internally. And I think that's the danger of modern life sometimes. We celebrate output, reward productivity, we praise constant growth. People get honour badges for burnout. And if you actually want to see my own wheel and how it looks after doing this exercise, I will link my YouTube channel in the show notes. I'll actually be releasing this video in a couple of weeks as part of this whole health is wealth type journey. I'll also include a free printable version if you want to do your own life alignment check-in too, aka your Wheel of Life. So I just want to leave you with these 3 questions. Where are your scales right now? Where in your life are you over-investing? And where are you quietly under-investing? Because the side you ignore will eventually demand your attention. And it's always better to listen early than be forced to listen later. If you enjoyed this episode, it would really mean a lot if you took 30 seconds to follow the show and leave a quick review. It's what helps more people discover this and start building their own work optional life. You'll find everything else, including deeper dives and practical tools, over on my Substack, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, strategy beats stress, systems beat willpower, and your future is built on what you do consistently and not occasionally. Until next time.